and that we enter in together. So I chose the word covenant today because it's been on my mind a lot lately. It's been in a class I'm taking. It's been in some issues I'm seeing in the world that come to my mind. And it's a huge part of our faith tradition. The word covenant is our translation and what we see in it. But in the Old Testament, in what we call now the Hebrew Bible, the word was berith. That word implies an obligation. Covenant is a serious word, and when we say we enter into a covenant with a group or with someone or with God, it is not something to be taken lightly at all. That's why the word berith was used. It was an obligation you would have, and we can use words like bond to say the same things, or promise. You can inaugurate, according to the Hebrew language, a berith, an obligation, by words alone or even by ceremonies. And today we'll have some ritual ceremonies which bring to mind the covenants that we make with each other and that we now have with God. In a covenant, both parties are in that bond. It's not a one-way street. In the Bible, the covenants are either between humans themselves or between humankind and God. In the New Testament, which was mostly written in Greek originally, the word was diatheke, which is, to me, just a really cool word to say, diatheke. It's a little bit like Teo, now that I know how to say it, but for some reason I could say diatheke correctly and not his name. In that, and there is some debate over biblical scholars about using the word diatheke or how to translate that word. Oftentimes, if we were to look at the Greek text where the word diatheke would be, we now have the word covenant. But in other places where the word diatheke was, we now have the word testament. And many will tell you that the difference, where we say Old Testament and New Testament, really is the difference between the Old Covenant with God and now the New Covenant with God, that they are translatable. The point I want to make about the concept of covenant, and I really could talk a lot about this, and we probably will in the future even more, but we have some very important matters to get to today, is that covenant is a part of our faith. There are many things that we call traditions that really are more customs. Things that come and go with the decades that we may have done, or our parents did, and now we do a little differently, or that we feel are important because we've done them for a few years. But those are really more customs than they are traditions. A tradition is something, to me, that it was a part of our faith, no matter what time passes and no matter where we go. Covenant is a tradition of the Christian church. It's a tradition of the Jewish faith as well. Throughout our Bible, and this is why we used several scriptures today, covenant is mentioned. There's so many more examples. The covenant between Jesus and the disciples, the covenant between Noah, as we read about today, the covenant between God and creation in the very beginning. It's a part of our faith. It's shown throughout the Bible, and it is something that we are obviously to take seriously. It's meant to be kept, and it's meant to be remembered. Oftentimes in our world, I think we forget that covenant, myself included. I've gone through time periods in my life where it took some time to remember the covenant I made with the church I was going to at that time. I hadn't gone in a few months, and I felt bad about that. But I realized I had made a covenant with that church when I joined, or even with God when I became confirmed, or even my parents spoke for me at my baptism, and then I affirmed it through confirmation. Those are covenants that I've made. Those of you who have been married know the word covenant very well, and you know how hard it is. Covenant is not easy. Being in a relationship like this in faith is not an easy thing. Marriages fail, and sometimes so do covenants. Now, the good news is that when they fail between us, we can make up for them, and we can make new covenants, and we can forgive each other and heal from them, hopefully. Sometimes we do not. However, in the covenant between God and people, unfortunately, although I know a forgiving and a loving God, that love doesn't come without consequences at times, and we perhaps may have felt that even in our own lives. So often people have asked me, I don't understand why God's allowing this to happen to me, or why is God doing this to me? And I just can't help but wonder why they think God would be showing up to fix every part of their life when they haven't shown up for God in any way. Again, that doesn't take away from where I believe God is always present with us. Sometimes we have to learn hard lessons, and it takes tough times to bring us back into a relationship with God and our faith. Our church certainly has experienced times like that, and I believe now as we realize the covenant that as a church we have with God, we're seeing the joys of acknowledging that and what happens when you remember the word covenant. It's a marriage, really, as was mentioned in the scripture today, between us and God as the church. We see that symbolism as us as the bride and Jesus as the groom. I don't know of marriage. I've never been married, but I've watched many of them. I've seen my parents' marriage, and I know that it's not easy. But I know that my parents especially know the word covenant. I'm sure many of you do as well. That when times get tough or people make mistakes, you stick it out because you made a solemn promise. Now, I don't want anyone who's ever been divorced or suffered the loss of a relationship or left the church to believe that I think that covenant shouldn't be broken at times. We all deserve to be in a happy and fulfilling relationship, whether it's with our church or our loved ones, and that if things are hurtful and never going to change, we know from our covenant with God that God wants better for us as well. But these are serious matters, and we take them serious. So often in our world, we forget the covenants we make. Even living in a community, whether we want to or not, we have an unimplied covenant with each other that we will take care of each other, and that we will help each other and look out for each other. When we don't acknowledge that, especially for those of faith, when we pretend that our covenant only exists on a Sunday morning, we see the consequences of it in failing communities and with crime and addiction problems, or really, in my mind, just problems of ignoring each other. I've seen it recently, even again last evening, with a difficult situation in our very neighborhood right here, where I had to remember the covenant I had made with a person who wasn't acting appropriately last night in our neighborhood, and I had to speak with him in some ways, and I will tell you that had I not been in a covenant with God or known that he was at one time accepted into a church who doesn't care for him anymore, I would have forgotten the covenant myself. I remembered the stole that I wear, and that it represents for many a yoke with Jesus. Not a choker, but a yoke. There's a difference, we hope, that when two oxen are yoked together, as in people in marriage are yoked together, you often hear about in wedding vows, that it's an equal relationship. One ox can't get ahead of the other or behind, that they both have to do equal work. And yeah, the yoke is burdensome, but it helps get the work done in a more efficient way. I remembered how I'm yoked with God now, and with Jesus, and that I can't be the Jason I might have been 15 or 20 years ago. And luckily I responded to the situation last night in a way that I couldn't imagine a few hours later I would have. I think at that moment God was pulling the yoke and I was just wearing it. Because I couldn't imagine that I would have been as patient as I was when I felt so threatened in a situation. And this is someone who I have cared for in the past, and they have cared for me. The issues in our community are deep and are serious, and we are in a covenant with God to help take care of them. The issue of addiction wears a lot of different faces. One moment a person will treat you with all the love in the world and hug you and tell you that you're everything to them and appreciate your help, and the next moment they're not even there anymore, and it really truly appears as if the devil himself is speaking to you. And I knew that it was, in a way, in my mind, the devil himself speaking and not the person who I had grown to care about. Covenant's a serious thing. And today we're going to enter into covenant with 4 members. And I want them to know that there is an expectation. But the expectation is not just on them. But the expectation is also on the membership of this church. We are yoked together. And oftentimes when new members come, I've seen this in the past and perhaps we've even experienced it here, people get so excited, myself included. Oh, they're good at this. Now we can do that, you know. If we have someone come in with art talents, oh, we're going to have a painting on the walls. Heather, I'm looking at Heather and Vaughn right now, you know. And that's true. We do have expectations for people to use their time and their talents here in this church. But on the other hand, we can't forget as a church that by the words we say today and the covenant we make with them, that they should have expectations of us as well. That when we accept them into our community in covenant, that we are bonded with them and with their lives, that we will be there for them when they need us. Not just the elders and the deacons of the church, but the members of this church. That we will look out for them and say hello to them. I've seen many times in churches, not here, luckily, yet, but I'm also the pastor, so people tend to say hi to me more than other people. But I've heard about members passing each other and not acknowledging each other, and yet on a Sunday morning they're best of friends. And the covenant is not just from 9 to 10 on Sunday morning. It belongs in Burger's Market as well, or in Redner's, or BG's, or wherever you might shop. That you ask about each other, and you check in on each other, and you pray for each other, and you help each other. Now, some may take advantage of that, and then it's no longer a yoked relationship, and we have to be responsible with that. But we remember today the words that we'll say, and that we shouldn't forget, that as we accept these members, we remember also as a community that we are accepting them into our care as well. We are gaining so much by gaining them, but we are also here to give them so much a part of us and our heart. And so, now I'd like to ask those people who wish to join our church in the covenant of membership to come forward, and we will get to these important happenings.